Greetings, everybody. I'm Jonathan Albin, 50 years of experience behind the RPG Shield, and I really want to help you have outstanding games at your table. We're going to be talking about looking at the very concept of role-playing encounters in a completely new way, and I think it's going to give you some insight on how you can improve the nature of the games you play, especially if you've been at it for a while, just like I have been. So let's get ready to get started. Before that, make sure though, if you haven't yet, follow this channel and click all the buttons down below, because clicking buttons is cool and it also helps our show stay daily. Alrighty, so today we're going to be talking about, as I mentioned, reimagining your encounters, and we're going to be doing that fundamentally by covering a bunch of different topics and talking about how they can be used in concert to make your game sessions more dynamic. Now, if you've been a game master as long as I have, the very mechanics of your RPG sessions will be, pardon me, associated with the creature you bring to the table, the kinds of gear they bring with them, what the conditions of the fight are, and pretty much after that it's simply rolling dice, making movements of miniatures on the table or whatever, but generally that's about all that really takes to do it. So we're going to be looking at that completely different, and the first thing we have to do to think about role-play games differently is to basically follow along with each of these chapter headings. I'm going to basically state the chapter heading and then move on through it, with the idea of clipping the video to make it more fluid on YouTube. So the first thing we have to do is consider our adventures instead of being individual pieces of a story and breaking it down into micro segments and then reconnecting it in after the fights are over. We need to try to set a stage. And this comes from the experience of all of the years that we've watched movies together and seen how things play out. Quite often, the same monsters or creatures we see in one or two scenes suddenly ratchet up and are more dangerous, and then ultimately become an absolute threat. In like fashion, we want to try to stage the structure of our conflicts. And when we're talking about simple monster encounters, this is probably not necessary. But generally, when you're talking about a villain who's going to be part of your story in an ongoing basis, and you want to really emphasize the threat level, these are the ones that you really want to stage. You want to consider them in a bunch of different phases of action. And it can be as simple as one or two, but it could be very intricate and quite developed, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And when you are first starting out, of course, you aren't thinking about it from those terms. You're just simply wanting to get through the actions. And so using the monster hit points as your gauge, you just decide, what the thresholds would be. And what I'm trying to refer to here is, think of it in terms of if you were going to create the movie version. You're going to have, let's say, the cute little little bear cubs come walking onto the stage, and everybody thinks they're cute, and you have a fun experience of taking pictures with the bears or whatever. And then you cut away to the scene of the mother, and the mother's original interaction with the mortals or the humans in the scene were probably not as expansive or not as interesting, so to speak. But as the cubs get involved, now her maternal instincts will change her portrayal towards the other characters in the story. So in like fashion, your stage will change as the mother bear now starts to become defensive. So then you play through a few rounds of that, and you interact in that stage, and the players begin to see this may not have been a great plan to get the cubs involved. And so now the mother bear has not only engaged and is interacting with the players, now the mother is really trying to separate her cubs from the individuals, and so therefore the conflict starts to escalate. And then if something, say, really horrible happens and something happens untoward to one of the cubs, they get caught in a trap or something, the mother will go ballistic, and now you have the fight for your life. Well, see, in that story, we've got 3 different stages. So when you are maintaining a stage-like structure, you have the idea of what those ratchet points will be in advance of the actual action, and therefore give the players the opportunity to see it coming, which brings us to our second point. We want to establish the transitional points between these in the end. By doing so, what I'm referring to in particular is becoming aware of what you will use as the trigger point in the fight to let the players know that you are moving from one scene to the next. So, for example, a bear's roar, maybe the thundering of her charging approach. These kinds of physical transitions will allow the players to realize that the gravity has changed. Maybe the cubs aren't being playful anymore. Now they're trying to escape or trying to get away. This adds a methodology, and this really is essential when we're talking about maintaining the scene the way we want. I'm going to go and put these all up here because we're going to get to them eventually. So pardon me for being distracting by looking down at my screen, but I want to make sure I get all of these resolved. All right. So once you've established that there's going to be a set of stages involved, then it's a matter of maintaining that definite strategy from the beginning to the end. If the cubs are supposed to be playful, and then in stage 2 they become defensive, and in stage 3 they actively are trying to get away, this gives a visual representation in the scene so that the players can react to it. And that's really important because the players need to feel these transition points, even possibly more so than the villains and the creatures that you're trying to portray. It's not a matter of changing necessarily their combat stats, although it could be. You definitely want to change their demeanor and their approach to the conflict. Now, this also means that you need to be constantly clarifying to the players which of the stages they are in, and demarking the separation between them so that the players will have an opportunity to react to each of the stages appropriately. So if they are at first being, coaxing and interested in the cubs or whatever, and you're letting them play through that part of it, just let them know that they do see the mother on the hillside, and she's now standing erect, which bears don't do as nearly as often as you might think, and she's sniffing the air to see what's going on. This gives the players the flag that there might be a change coming up. I've done this in other role-play games using mechanistic things like a sand timer, where I just start the clock and they're aware of it, or I start rolling dice or flipping through a book. All of these are methodologies for showing these transition points before they happen, so that way when they do, you can clarify specifically what point they are in. Are they still in stage 1, or are they moving to stage 2? And how is that, what is that manifestation going to look like? This is important when you're considering a games group too, that you collect all of the information from all of the players in each of the stages. So if somebody wanted to do something in stage 1 and now you're getting ready to go to stage 2, make sure that you afford them the opportunity to take that action, because that way you're gaining the appreciation of all the players in the stage, and they are aware of where the clock is, where the timer is, and when things are going to change. Not so much in a mechanistic way, but more specifically in a homogeneous. Okay, things are changing. Get our licks in, because we're not going to get a chance a little bit later. It also means that you have to call out these stages very directly when they change. Say, okay, now the mother's in full charge. She's upset with the way her cubs are being treated and is bounding towards you. That way, now they're reacting to this new threat in light of what's going on with the others. All of this to say, you really need to have an idea of how the ending should be defined before you even get there. I'm not saying that you plan out who gets harmed and how much damage is done or whatever, but just merely what's going to transact. Is the mother going to be selfless and sacrifice herself to save the cubs? Or are the cubs going to come to the mother's defense? Just have an idea of what it's going to be, and then playing it through. And then as they go through each stage, when they get to the completion of each one, they get the opportunity to react to that as well, which is really to kind of define the denouement. What is it that comes after? Because at the end of the session, you don't want it to simply be, well, you've killed the monster and the babies are still there, because that does not enforce the message you were trying to do with the scene at all. Now, that doesn't, again, there are people that will say, take that and believe that means that I am railroading my characters or my players into a series of actions. Instead, I'm just setting up the scene so that I know when the scene will end, because at some point, the cubs and the mother will try to escape. And generally, it'll be sometime earlier rather than later, and therefore, if you did not afford them the opportunity, you actually undermine the very value of the scene, because if your purpose is to have the party follow the bears back to where they live so that they can have that interaction on home turf or home territory, that's fine. But don't leave out that denouement, because if they have gotten the opportunity to win and you've successfully given them that, then let them exult in that victory and appreciate the fun of it, because in doing your scenes with this stage structure, with this advancing mechanism, with the danger increasing over time, and then a release at the end that provides them with the satisfaction of completing the scene, that improves the outcome of your scenes and causes players to want to come back session after session to see what their next encounters might be. Alrighty, I've run through the pieces I wanted to get this re-recorded. I apologize for this being so rushed, but I definitely want to get this out to you. I'm Jonathan Albin. This has been NycosRPG, and we'll see you next time in Game Master's Toolbox.